So for quite a while now, we've been getting some requests to have a go at painting a Gundam miniature. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. I've had a look around and I've bought one and I've built it up, and here it is. This is a RX-782 Gundam, which is really an iconic one, certainly the one I've seen the most often. And whilst I don't have much experience with Gundam specifically, I have built an Evangelion kit before. And I got to say, these things are incredible. If you've never had a go at building a Gundam model or any of these sort of giant robot models, they're basically phenomenal in how well engineered they are. The sprues are all different coloured plastics that are all cast together, so the sprue itself is different colours, and it means that as you cut the pieces off, they're all the correct colour that they need to be for the final model. Beyond that, you also don't need glue to put them together, because they can just literally push together and they stay in one piece. And all the joints are very precisely engineered, meaning the model is posable as well. So they're based like an action figure. They're really, really cool. Now, whilst this model is amazing, even at the entry grade level of what we got here, I can't help but wonder how cool it would look after it's painted. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, because the engineering of this is so precise, I'm a bit worried about just painting it as is whilst it's still assembled. So what I'm going to be doing is just basically gently pulling it apart. So all the limbs and things, for example, like this arm here, I'm just going to take that apart and separate it, and then I can move on to masking some of these joints. Separating those parts has proved to be quite easy, and you can see I've got them all laid out just here. So my plan is to try and minimise the amount of layers of spray I have to put on individual components and aim to really block them in with one particular colour. We might see if there's some exceptions to that, but we'll see how we get on. And first of all, we're going to be looking at mainly parts that can be undercoated either white or black, but there's also going to be things like blue as well. But we'll start out with the white, and my plan here is just to check the parts that are mostly white, such as the legs and the arms and things, and basically mask off any parts that need to be quite precise with the fit of things, so joints and that sort of thing. So to do that, I have some masking tape, which I've got just here. I've also got some blue tack too, which I might be using as well. But basically my plan is just to rip off some bits of this. So for example, there like that. And then I'm going to use this just to clear out some parts, such as the ankle joint just here, by just threading it into the parts where the bits are going to come together and basically just taping over them there like that. So I've masked out a whole load of components, and here I have all the ones that I'm going to be spraying with some white. See, I've made sure to cover all the joints and things where it goes together. And what I want to do is just go outside now, completely coat these with a white primer to make it as smooth as possible, and then I'm just going to give them plenty of time to dry. And when we do so, we can then move on to the next colour. Here we have the parts of that white spray now applied, and in some places you can see the coloured plastic showing through, but that's absolutely fine because I did keep that spray thin on purpose to keep it nice and smooth. And to be honest, I'm going to be painting those parts with those colours anyway, so it serves as kind of like a guidance in some ways. But now what I'm going to do is move on to the next spray colour, and actually I've got a plan to use a few different spray colours here to get that nice even base coat on these components. What I'm looking at doing now is red, and then I'm going to move on to some blue and finally some black. But for the red, the parts I want to pick out are first of all around the torso, and I've actually got two of them just here, because you've got the central body and I've got this lower part of the waist that fits underneath just there. And this has got red on here, which is what I'm mainly concerned about. So basically I want to spray these, then I'm going to mask out the red on that, and then I can do the blue on top of that. Now in addition, some of the white parts require some red spray on them, and that is going to be the front of the shield, so just there, and the front of the feet around there. So once again, I'm going to be using some masking tape just to get these red. So for this, it's going to require a little bit of precision, but thankfully the tape is quite thin. So my plan is just to get some of this spaced out there like that. And then I'm just going to take my time masking things off, such as the front of the shield just here, so we get a nice neat line where the white is going to meet that red. And here we have these parts now ready to be sprayed as well, and I have been especially careful on the shield to make sure it's all neat and tidy. But what I'm going to do now is take these parts outside, spray them red, and when we come back we can move on to spraying blue. And there we go, the red spray's dry too, so now I'm going to move on to the next colour, which is going to be a blue. Now the blue only really is appearing on one piece, which is the central torso just here. And so what we need to do is mask out the bits that need to stay red, which is just this sort of ring-like part that we've got around here underneath the chest. So once again, I'm just going to be using my masking tape for this, and it's a matter of just taking time again to make sure it's all nicely masked out. So I'm just going to get a little bit at a time like this and start placing it around this segment right here. And here's the torso now all thoroughly masked out, so we can move on to the next thing, which is going to be to take this outside and spray it blue. Then when we get back, we can move on to the black. And here it is with that blue spray now dry. And honestly, at this point, I'm really excited about taking off some of this masking tape and seeing how it looks. But before that, there is one more colour I want to spray onto this miniature, and that is going to be some black. Now, originally, I had planned to spray some of those internal joints and things black, but the thing is you can't really see them, and I'm quite concerned about things getting gummed up with excess paint. So I've decided to leave those as the bare plastic and instead just move on to picking out some certain parts which I definitely want to be black for painting later on. Now, that involves the rifle. So, for example, this piece just here, I'm going to go and spray this black entirely, but also I've got some other components that I have once again masked out, and they are the back of the shield and the feet, which you can see I've just masked out so we can spray the back of these black as well. So I'm going to go outside now and do this, and when we come back we'll get to that moment where we can start to take off some of this tape. And here we are, the black spray's dry as well, so it's now time to move on to that big moment and start to take off some of the masking tape. And to illustrate this, I'm going to do it on one of the feet, which you can see I also sprayed the black on underneath. And really it's just a matter of just peeling this off. So we can see by doing so, the colour starts to get revealed. Now when doing this kind of thing, there's always going to be a little bit of bleeding happening with some of the colours. It's just about impossible to avoid it, to be honest. So that's not a problem. It just means after this is done, what we'll need to do is just go around with some appropriate colours and use that to neaten up. But there we've got the black and the red, and if I just grab some tweezers, I can also start picking this up too, because underneath here, we should have the white visible too. Yeah, there we go. So what I'm going to do now is just carry on peeling away all of this tape, and then we just spend a little bit of time tidying everything up. Well, that was satisfying removing that tape, and you can see it's worked out really nicely. The colours are nice and bold, and we've got the black there on the back of the shield too. And when we look at things like the torso, we've also got the red and the blue next to each other. Now, there has been a little bit of bleeding, but I thought there'd be a bit more, to be honest, but all the same, there is still some. So if we go back to the shield, you can see it in areas such as just around there, a little bit of the white slipped out there into that red. So what we need to do now is neaten that up, and at the same time we can go around and make sure we pick out the colours on smaller areas where we couldn't really use the masking tape to get to them. So I'm going to start out by using some red, and I picked out some Sanguine Scarlet for this, which is about the same colour as the red spray I've been using, and to apply it I'm going for quite a small brush here. This is my size 0 from Artisopus, so a little bit smaller than a medium layer brush from Citadel. But the key thing is that it holds a nice point. And with this, I'm just going to get some of this thinned down. Then I'm going to start out by quickly going around all the parts that are red and just making sure they have a nice crisp line where they meet other colours. So for example, if we go to the shield, you can see we've got that little bit I pointed out earlier on just around here. I'm just going to really carefully and really neatly just bring that red up and over that bit of white that we've got right there. So that is all neat and tidy there like that. Now also, I'm going to be using this opportunity to pick out those smaller parts as I mentioned, and a great example of that is going to be on the head of this Gundam. Now around here we do have some red bits to pick out that are all quite small, such as the mouthpiece just here. So I'm just going to very carefully block this in, being really careful about avoiding that white. And even more tricky is going to be getting the red bit that appears underneath the eye, so just in here. There we go. Now I've finished cleaning up the red. The next thing to do is apply some more base coats on here to continue cleaning things up and also introduce a few new colours as well. And we're going for bright colours here just to keep that nice punchy anime feel that we're looking for. So first of all, we want a nice bright yellow. I'm going to use some Skulker Yellow here. I'm going to introduce this onto all the yellow panels and things. Then once that's done, we'll move on to tidying up the blue. And for this, I'm going to be using some marine blue. Now with that done, we can then fix up all the white. So here I'm going to stick to a pure white with some White Star. And then for the black, I'm actually going to paint over all the black with a slightly sort of like brownish grey, a colour that's going to match those internal components that I haven't actually painted at all yet. So for this, I'm going to be using some Eidolon Grey. But I'm going to be starting out with Skulker Yellow, and to apply it, I'm sticking to my size 0 brush, and here I'm going to be doing much the same sort of application, and I'm looking for a nice, neat and smooth base coat on these details. Now for some of these parts, they're actually already painted white, so painting this colour is going to be very easy on those. For example, here on the pelvis, these little blocks here, these need to be yellow, so I can just paint this straight over the top and get that nice bold yellow there like that. But there are some parts where it's going to require just a little bit more work of building up this colour because there'll already be something like red. So for example, on the shield, we do have this cross design on here, and this needs to be yellow too, so I'm still just going to neatly base coat this in. It'll just require 2 or 3 thin coats. Having applied those few thin coats, we've now got that nice yellow there on those parts, and on the head I also used the yellow to pick out the eyes too. But for the next component that we need to paint, it's going to be the torso here. And you see again there's been some yellow put here, but what we now need to do is neaten the blue. So I'm looking for any parts where I may have splashed a bit of yellow onto it, but also any parts where a little bit of that red spray may still be showing. And with that, the blue's nice and tidy too, so it's on to the next colour. So now we're looking at neatening up any white. So for this, I'm using some white start, and I'm looking for any little patches where, again, the colours have just bled over, or any mistakes I made earlier with some base coats, such as some red around here. I'm just going to use the white just to clean these up too. And now the white's nice and clean, we can move on to the last colour, which is going to be for black details that we need to paint in. And for this, I'm actually going to use an off black, using a very dark grey, using some Eidolon Grey. And this is going to be for things such as the jump jets we've got here on the back of the torso, and also the back of the shield. But I'm going to make sure not to paint the beam rifle with this colour, because I want to make sure it's got a little bit of distinction from this shade of black that we've got here. And here we have all the components now neatly blocked in with all the various main colours. And so we can now move on to the next step, which is going to be to varnish this, because this model, being somewhat like an action figure, is going to take some wear and tear. So it needs to be a gloss varnish here, because a gloss varnish is much more hard wearing than a matte varnish. Now again, I'm going to make sure to avoid spraying any of those internal components that I've not painted, though I will mask out the ball joints that appear on the back of the wrists on the hands, so I can spray the hands and make sure they're ready for a bit of shading too, because that gloss varnish is going to give us some benefits, and that's going to make the shading of this miniature really easy. Now the spray I'm going to be using is Tamiya Clear here, which in my ongoing quest to find quality varnishes I found to be really reliable. So I'm going to go outside, spray all these parts with that. When we come back, we'll move on to the next step. I've given that varnish plenty of time to dry, so now it's nice and tough, and we can take advantage of how smooth it is to do some shading, because over the top we can use some enamel washers, and capillary action is going to really pull them into the recesses, meaning it's going to be quick and easy to do. Now for this I want to use a black wash, so the one I picked out is from AK Interactive. It's shafts and bearings, and basically it's a black wash designed for weathering effects, but it's going to be suitable for our purposes just here. You can see the sort of thing that it is, nice and dark, ideal for our purposes. Now straight out the bottle, this is going to be a little bit too strong, so what I'm going to do is just dilute it with some white spirit, also from AK Interactive. This is the one I'm going to be using just here to help take the edge off it, and I also have some enamel thinners too. Now this one's a completely different company, you can see it's from Humbrol, totally different bottle shape, and the reason is because this is the one I use to clean my brushes afterwards, so you can see it's all murky inside there. So it's always a good idea to have two on hand for purposes such as that. So what we need to do is get this ready to apply, and so to do it I'm going to be using my tile as a palette. Just need to get these two ready. There we go. And to apply it, I'm going to be using an old brush. It's a small layer brush from Citadel here. I'm going to start out with a bit of the white spirit. Just going to get a little puddle of this on the palette, and I'm looking for a roughly 50-50 mix here with the paint. So with some of that on there, now I'm going to start grabbing some of the paint and mix that together. And there you go, because you get a nice thin black wash. And with this now, I'm going to start introducing it into recesses and panel lines and things on the armour of our Gundam. And it's going to be on all the colours we've done so far, and all the parts that I've done the gloss varnish on. So for example, on the head, you can see in these recesses here, just going to start dotting it into them, and the paint will just get pulled into those corners, giving us some nice deep dark shading. Once all that shading's been applied, we can really take advantage of the enamel paint, because what we can do is remove excess parts of it where it's splashed on surrounding areas. So for example, on top of the helmet there, you can see we've got some, well, patches really. What I've got is a cotton bud, and I've just put a little bit of the white spirit on it. And all you need to do is just gently rub away that excess paint, and because it won't fall into the recess, we retain that shading in those recessed panel lines. With that excess paint now wiped away, here we have the result, with some nice neat panel lining done on all those components. So now what I want to do is apply a few transfers on here, and I don't have any specific Gundam ones, but what I do have is some ones from 40k which I think look suitable. I've got this transfer sheet here from the Leagues of Votan, and I think some of these numbers will look quite nice on it just to break some areas up. So I'm just going to apply a few of those. Not going to go crazy, just a few on there to add a bit of interest, and once that's done, we can then move on to matting this all down. And here we have some transfers applied. You can see I've gone for the number 27 there on the breastplate and on the shield, and a hazard marking too. And on some of the limbs I put some little transfers too, which you can see just here on the side of the arm and on the side of the leg too. I put on some little code numbers there, some little serial numbers. So I'm happy with that. So we can now do the next thing, which is going to be to matte all of this down and seal down all the transfers. And for this, I'm going to use a spray matte varnish. I'm going to be using some Tamiya Flat Clear, which once again I found to be really reliable. So I'm going to spray all of this, and once that's dry, we'll come back and see how it's going. And now the flat clear is completely dry too. Things are looking pretty good. Everything's matted down and sealed down as well. So we can now move on to the next phase, which is going to be to weather the miniature. Now, I was planning on weathering all the components separately, but thinking about it, I'd rather actually refit it back together. So this way I can make sure all the weathering makes sense and all lines up with other parts that appear on other panels. So that means it's time to start removing the masking tape that covers all the joins and just plug it all back together. So for example, starting on the body here, I'm going to use some tweezers just to make sure I can really get in there and remove these bits of tape. And then I'm just going to reassemble the miniature. And here he is, all fully rebuilt, and that was really fun getting it all back together because it's really cool to see it come back to life. And well, from this point on, it's really a matter of weathering it to really properly bring it to life. And what I'm going to do is start out by doing some chipping. Now, there's various different types of chipping I want to do here with different colours, and the first of these is going to be done using just a brush on parts that are going to be over the top of bright colours. So I'm looking at the transfers that are over the blue and the red. Now, I'll illustrate this on the red, but I'm going to do the same thing on the blue as well. But for the red, we just want that original red that's underneath it. So we're using the colour that's really close to that spray, which is going to be Sanguine Scarlet. But for the blue, I'll use some Marine Blue. But Sanguine Scarlet's what I'm going to be using here, and to do so, I'm using my small brush. So this is a size 00, which is about the same sort of size as a small layer brush from Citadel. And I'm just going to get some of this nicely thinned down so it's quite runny. So down to about that point just there. Just make sure I only got a small amount there, so I have that fine point on the bristles. And with this, I'm now going to start scratching over these white transfers that I have on the shield. So for example, on the two just here, I'm just going to lightly just start scoring into it there like that with some little gentle lines and some little notches and things too. What this does was, well, it will just give a nice illusion as if this was painted on rather than being a transfer. Now that's done on those parts, we can move on to chipping on the next colour, which is going to be some white that's being revealed through the coloured parts of the armour. So if you imagine underneath those coloured parts like the blue, the yellow and the red, originally it was white, and so we're having the paint flaking away, revealing that white. So to do this, we need a white, and I'm using some White Star, and because of this is going to be on a larger area, I'm going to approach it with two steps. First of all, using a little bit of sponge, and then secondly, using that fine brush once again. With the sponge, I've got it just here, and see what I'm going to do is just ball it up so it's got a rough, slightly irregular shape to it there like that. Then just get a little bit of the paint on the sponge like that, and then on your dry palette just start dabbing away the excess. Now it's a bit tricky to see this on this because it's white paint of course and a white palette, but basically you can see the sort of thing I'm doing, removing the excess paint, making sure there's not much left over. And once that's done, we can then start applying it. And what we now need to do is start lightly sponging this onto the coloured parts where you would get paint flaking away, which would typically be on corners mostly, but you'll get a little bit on flat areas too. Basically just dot it along like this to create that illusion of the paint just chipping like that. All you do is carry on until you're happy, and with any weathering effect I do recommend you just take your time and gradually build it up until you're happy and then stop there. But what you can do once you've chipped away a bit like that is switch to a brush for a slightly more controlled application, just to connect some parts and make a few bits larger if you want to. For this, go back to your small brush, so I'm returning to my size 00 here, and with this we just start connecting some of these chips. So first of all, make sure the paint's thinned down and under control, and then look for where you got some of them, such as around here, for example. Then just use your brush just to start joining them together in the areas where they're strongest. So just dotting it there like that. And with this, we can also start to add a few scratches going out from these parts too. You can see now just how much of a difference it makes adding that chipping on there. Definitely really changes the whole feel of the model, and I have been sure to do it on the feet as well, down here on the red, and I made it a few little scuff marks too, just to give the suggestion that it's been moving around. And with that done, we can now move on to the next colour we're going to be doing chipping with, which is going to be focusing on the white. And here, what I'm going to go for is a brown, and the idea is this is the undercoat colour that will be beneath the white paint. So I'm going to want to go for a nice warm brown to be a nice contrast here, so I'm going to use some cuirass leather, and to apply it, I'm doing the same thing as what we just did with the white, and I'm starting out with some sponge, but I do have my size 00 brush on hand as well. Now what I'm going to do is just ball it up, and again just get a little bit on the sponge there, work it into it, and then just start dotting it along until there's not much left. So I'm just going to keep on going till it's down to around about that sort of strength there. And this is then going to be focused on the white parts. So if we go back to the shield, it's going to be areas such as the trim around here. And I'm just going to start dotting it on so again it builds up that random speckled pattern there like that. Just gradually work my way around, always concentrating on edges and corners that would see a little bit more wear and tear. Now every now and then I'm going to be switching to my small brush, so I'm jumping over to the size 00 here, and just like with the white, we can use this to connect up some of the areas, just to make them a little bit larger and add a few more angled scratches as well. If you want to, if you look on the parts that we've done previously, so these white parts, if you have any really large areas, you can always dot a little bit of this in the middle of those parts too, just to give the impression that these scratches are really deep on those parts. And with that done, you can see the model goes through a massive transformation, all of a sudden looking like it's an actual heavy piece of machinery. And once again, as we go down to the feet, you can see I've been scuffing it quite a bit there to give that sort of sense of movement. And I've done the same on the shield, where I've been really heavy on the bottom of it, where it might be hitting the ground. So with that done, I'm now going to move on to the next effect, which is to add some streaks of grime on there. And to do this, I'm going to be using one of those enamel paints, another one from AK Interactive. What I've got is some winter streaking grime. I'm going to put on some of it, then use some of that thinner just to start blending it out and smooth it out. But first of all, we need to get the colour on there. Now I'm going to be using that same small layer brush I used earlier from Citadel, and this time I'm going to use my dry palette just to get some of this on here so I can control exactly how much I'm applying at once. What I'm going to do is just get some of this, then start running it into some recesses where you might get grime and things collecting. So for example, if we take a look at one of the legs down here, I'm just going to start running it into areas such as just there. I'm just going to start running it downwards like that, looking for larger chips too, and just having some of this just streaking down from those as well. You can see I've applied some now to the front of this leg, and so what I've done now is switched over to some of the white spirit I was using earlier, also from AK Interactive. And I'm using the same brush, so the small layer brush again. What I'm going to do is just lightly start scoring at some of this, just basically pulling it down like that and just blending it into its surroundings. Just being careful not to go at it too heavily so I don't disturb any of the paintwork, but just very gently there like that to get that nice sort of streaky appearance there on the armour. And here's the result after applying that streaking grime. And as you can see, it really brings it to life and gives the sense that it's been standing out in the rain and seeing lots of action. And honestly, doing that application is really, really easy too. So if you've never tried using enamels in that way, I definitely recommend you give it a go. Now with that done, we've got one more thing to do, which is to add a bit of detail onto that beam rifle. So for this, what I'm going to do is dry brush on it first of all. At the moment, it's just primed with that black. So what I'm going to do is dry brush it with a dark grey. And here I'm using some Dungeon Stone Grey. Then for the light on top of it, I want to give it sort of a golden reflection feel to it. So what I'm going to do with this is base coat it using some Dragon's Gold. Then I'm going to apply a wash of some Battlemud wash over the top. And then to finish off, I'm going to highlight with some Glistening Gold. But first of all, we're going to dry brush it using some Dungeon Stone Grey. So to do this, I have a medium dry brush from Citadel, so quite a good size for the area that we're doing. And with this, I'm just going to pick up some of the paint on the tip of the bristles, get some tissue and use it to work the paint into the brush and also remove the excess paint. I'm just going to carry on until I'm down to around about that sort of strength there in the paper. With that reached, it's then a matter of just applying it onto the rifle. And to do this, I'm just going to lightly flick it back and forth like this so as to catch all the sharp edges and corners. That dry brushing has really brought out the texture there of the rifle, so now it's time to move on to picking out the light, and to start out I'm using some Dragon's Gold here applied with a size 0 brush. For this first step, it's just a matter of blocking this detail in entirely. With the even base coat now built up, it's time for a wash, and here I'm going for a dark brown wash. So I've got some Battlemud wash, and still using the size 0 brush, I'm just going to paint it straight over the top. And then finally, I'm going to move on to Glistening Gold, being applied with a size 00 brush for this one, and this is going to be a highlight. So I'm looking for the edges and corners, such as around here. I'm just going to gently follow around with the tip of the brush to pick these out. Now, once this is done, I'm going to apply some flat clear over the top of the rifle as well, just to make sure it's nicely protected. And once that's done, the model will be complete. And here we have it. All those details are now painted, so this Mobile Suit Gundam RX-782 is complete. So this has been a really fun experience because, as I mentioned, I have built an Evangelion kit before, but that was quite a long time ago, so it's been really interesting to see how these sets have evolved. And honestly, it's just a really clever kit. Even this one is basically the beginner's version of it, and there are higher quality ones out there, and I'm definitely interested in taking a look at one of those now. But just the experience of putting it together and seeing how it articulates is just really, really fun. So if you've never tried one of these kits before, I do recommend giving it a go. Now, if you're going to paint it like I did here, just remember it's really important to make sure that you mask off all the parts that are going to move, because they are very precise and you need to keep that slight bit of friction so it holds the poses that you want. It's a little bit tedious, but it's definitely worth it. Now, for painting it, it looks a bit strange once you have finished all the main colours, because it more or less looks the same as it did before you start putting paint on it. But it is really important to have that basis because it allows the weathering to really take onto the model, and honestly, that's where it comes to life. So if you're going to have a go, have fun, and we'll see you again very soon.